Okay, so we're gonna look at the elephant in the room here, which is folk. So you'll see that there are actually 4 different type of folk, and when you think of folk, I want you to think of fairies, like traditional story type fairies. They're tiny, they fly with wings. Now, obviously, in this LARP, they are not tiny; they are human sized. Um, but think of like the typical fairy, and I know this one is called fairy. Don't worry about that. Think of the typical fairy and then split it up into 4 different archetypes of fairy. And that's what the folk are. The folk are 4 different types of fairies. I know one is called fairy, don't worry about that. But they are fairies. They have little wings, or do they? I don't. Okay, so they're like elves. So picture elves with pointy ears, and then they have a stripe around their face. And the color is what represents what they are. So I know that every folk I see with the blue stripe is a fairy, and every folk I see with the yellow stripe is a spriggan. And they all share a lot of the base racials. So going over a folk is going to cover a lot of them. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to cover Brownie, and we're going to look at the base racials, and then we're also going to see that the same base racials are pretty much applied to all the other folk. Reduce casting, resist magic, spell, reduce casting, resist magic spell, magic is life. Yeah, so like they have the same base racials, right? So think of like beastmen, where all beastmen share the same base racials, and they have like different elders. That's what these are. These have all the same base racials, and then they have a different elders. So, and the only difference in costuming is they have a different band across colored band across their eyes. That's it. There's individual lore for each of these different types of folk, and I would go as far as to say that folk is the most common race played because it's minimal makeup. There's a ton of them. There's a ton of folk, man, and there's just a ton of them, man. There's going to there it will be a minimum of like 5 of them around you at any given time. There's a ton of people playing folk, and it's for a good reason. They're cool. They're fairies. When they uh, we'll just dive right into their actual racials now. Curse. You can bestow. Oh yeah, the coolest thing is curse. So obviously, curse is a very much in line with like role playing. Curses are minor afflictions a character is able to bestow upon another. The effects must be role-played. Curses can only have role-playing effects, so they don't affect your character sheet. Uh, and they don't like majorly affect you, but it's annoying. It's just annoying. Like being cursed is annoying. Like your nose is now blue. Go figure out how to deal with that. You have to limp, or you have to talk like this now. Is these are good examples of curses, right? Uh, Cursing is it's funny the first time, but when it happens more than once, it gets really annoying really quick. Uh, and there's been times in the past when characters have really gone out of their way to frustrate other characters with curse. So be very careful about just walking around cursing things. It's not a good idea, and you get karma really quick. Uh, it's funny here and there, and for 5 build, you don't really want 10 of these. I think you really just want like one of these, to be honest. Uh, it's relevant, and there's like a whole bunch of like, hey, you can't really do it this way because that would really affect somebody's day. Um, there's a lot of like, you want to, if you're gonna play a folk, you need to read this whole thing. You need to read this whole thing. Uh, Reduce casting. They're a casting race. Duh. They're resist magic spell 10 times. That's really good. Speak with mammals. Again, you get a so folk have a lot of generic spell casting is really good. Okay, there's a lot of there's I would be it's about 60-40%. 60% of people I think are spell casting. Like and that's like the main thing they're doing. Everybody does a lot of the mixes of both for the most part, but a lot more people are casting spells than playing in the front lines most of the time. So they get reduced crafting, they they get resist magic spell, they get speak with animals, they get psionic shield. Uh, those are really common skills, and they're really common skills for a reason. They're very common and they pull up all the time, and you're gonna get good use out of all of those skills very commonly. So that's why when I say there's a lot of folk, there's a lot of folk. A lot of people look at this race and they're like, "Yep, this is it. This is the one. I want to be." There's a lot of people that go, "I want to be a fairy." There's a lot of people that go, "I want to be a fairy, and I'm gonna play as a fairy in my LARP," and that's okay. That's for them. Uh, each of these races have a kind of different little bit of a personality, and you can kind of see based off the picture, like brownie are kind of sneaky, folks are like fairies are generic, like the generic fairy. Spriggans are kind of like, I would say, menacing, maybe menacing, and then sprites are like helpful and friendly. All right, so we'll talk about brownies first. Oh, we need to talk about magic is life. So every game you have to eat magic. And it's not like eating magic like how a channeler absorbs magic. In adventuring and playing Shiftedlands, you're going to get stuff when you kill monsters or when you go on a quest, and you're going to encounter things on the ground that you can pick up, right? There's going to be stuff that you can gather. And out of that stuff, there are these things called components. Okay, and components are what some of the artisans use. Components are used in ritual stuff later. Components are used in a ton of things. And some of these components have magic properties. And so they have to absorb magic daily, or else they like die or something. Like literally. Like magic is life. You are magic. So if you're 250 total earned build, he has to consume one. Like there's like a ratio, 1/50th of your total earned build each logistics, or you have none of the racials active. Okay, yeah, you don't die. Okay, that's probably a lot better than not than dying. But like you don't get any of this stuff. All the build that you spend on all this stuff just doesn't exist if you don't eat magic. So you need to eat magic every single game, if which is typically the more advanced characters kind of have a stockpile of stuff because they've been playing for a hot minute. But when you just come in, it can be kind of interesting to find the it comes up. It's relevant. You need to be able to find components, and you need to eat components very regularly as a folk. Uh, and so there will be times when you're a fighting guy and you have a bunch of components that you have no use for because I'm not a crafter. I'm just here to hit stuff. And you go to a folk, and the folk's like, "Ooh, I'll buy that from you. I need to eat magic." And so there's this form of economy between folk and a lot of the other races where like they'll buy stuff off you to just eat it, because they just eat magic. Uh, Elder curses are different than these type of curses, and if you are throwing an elder curse at somebody, you mean business. Like you are trying to really ruin that person's day. There's no, yeah, for 1 year, for a whole year, and that's real life, man. That's a real life year. That sucks. And if you do this, you should go talk to Marshall, be like, hey, I'm thinking of doing this, because getting hit with a curse can really, really suck, like an elder one. You don't throw these around very often. Oh, oh yeah, I remember why people play folk now. Yeah, so brownie. So you know how we talked about there's earth, ice, lightning, and well, fire's another one. Do these guys get immunity to ice? So there's four elements, and each of the folk get an immunity to said element. I don't personally know which all of the ones are, but folk brownie clearly gets earth, immunity to earth, super good. Psionic blast, oh that's neat. They have different elders, and there's a elder magic is everything. So your ratio to becoming, because so the reason is that folk is kind of good. Folk is a very good race, and a lot of people were playing folk, and like every new person coming in was a folk because everybody read the rule book and was like, "Man, I'm gonna play a folk because this seems really good," and they weren't wrong. And so, Magic is Everything is a very important way to balance the value of being able to play a folk and have really cool stuff because it's fun to do cool stuff and we want people to do cool stuff, right? It's just really tough when an entire town is filled with folk. And that's not a bad thing, dude. Folk are cool. Folk are awesome and they have really fun roleplay. And a lot of the people I have great friendships with play folks and they're cool. Uh, Spoiler alert, you get wings. You get to be a fairy with wings when you play an elder folk. And that's like half the reason why a lot of people play folk is like, I want to be a fairy with wings. Uh, yeah. Uh, they get levitation. But the thing is that you get to wear wings. It's not like, oh, I just levitate. It's like, no, you get to wear wings as part of your costume now. Like that has to be a thing you do. Uh, and then so brownies are interesting. They get Eldritch Warrior. That's like the unique thing to brownies, I think, which is you spend sorcery. So if you're a spirit casting brownie, it's not really recommended, but you get to spend sorcery to do damage per swing. So it's like you could spend sorcery to do weapon mastery stuff, which is cool. Not directly to do weapon mastery stuff, because you spend weapon mastery to do extra damage, and Eldritch Warrior as a brownie means you can spend sorcery to do extra damage, right? So you're doing similar stuff, which is super cool, being able to do that. That's a very unique thing. There is a very, very popular character in town who is a brownie. I'm not going to mention them by name because that wouldn't be fair to them. But if you walk into town and you meet a brownie who's very loud, you will know exactly what character I'm talking about, and he's a very interesting person. You should talk to him. I'd say he's pillar of the community. Very cool guy. Again, fairies. Fairies get immunity to lightning, immunity to fear. Wow, that's pretty good. Reduce sorcery. Oh wow, they actually have very different elders. Psionic, inflict confusion. Oh, all of the elders folk get a psionic thing. They all get like psionic shield, I think, and then they all get like a unique psionic thing that they do as an elder. Transform to orc. I don't know why this is a thing, but apparently I guess spriggans can turn themselves into orcs. Immunity to fire. We'll talk about mist walking. We'll talk about mist walking. Just know that elder folk. Yeah, elder folk can mist walk. Uh, we talked about mists in I think the first episode of this series, and being able to mist walk is very interesting. It opens up a lot of stuff. Again, another reason why people play a lot of folk. Um, this is very much a I'm directly interacting with the plot marshals type of skill, which is why it's really neat. Uh, we'll get into that because there's a whole race that's dedicated to doing this. So when we talk about them, we'll talk about this. Reduce sorcery, transform to orc, inflict pain as an elder psionic. Uh, Capstone, they get wings. Yeah, I don't know. I guess this is the thing that they get to do. They get to turn into an orc. I don't know why. That's so silly. Folk are silly, man. What do sprites do? Okay, so they get all the same base results. Immunity to ice, reduce sorcery, inflict friendship. Oh, they get to do psionic friendship. That's super cool. Woodland concealment. That's just cool. You go read this. I'm not gonna explain how skirting astral plane works because that's really annoying. But woodland concealment, pretty okay. What do they do? Oh, that's it. That's all they do. So I think actually, this is my opinion. Okay, like don't hate me if you want to play Spriggan or Sprite, but I think out of the four folk, Brownie and Fairy are probably the neatest. I think they literally have like they're getting like one more skill, aren't they? Psionic inflict confusion. I mean, like for Fairy, you're trading immune to fear for turn into orc. there's some trade-offs here, right? Like there's some opportunity cost when it comes to like being immune to fear versus transforming into an orc. There's some opportunity cost here. Um, yeah, I've met a couple sprites. Sprites are cool. I've met a Spriggan who did psionic stuff. But yeah, that's folk. Folk or a whole bag, and you're gonna meet a lot of them, and they're gonna be a lot of the people that you interact with. Um, for a good reason. Folk are cool. I'd play a folk. So that's the four folk. We'll go into Gargoyle next.